On my dad's side of the family, we do have haemophilia. So at the age of 30 odd, my mum got tested and she had platelet defect. So when myself and my older sister Saoirse was born, they brought us forward for testing. But what ended up happening was when I was tested, they were actually like, she has von Willebrand's, and that means then we have 3 different bleeding disorders within my family unit. I grew up in the countryside. I loved being in the countryside, and I would often go up to my neighbours who lived up the road who had a massive conker tree. And I remember my younger neighbour, she grabbed a rock and, like we were doing, and threw it up at the tree. But unfortunately, I got a little knock to my head, and the cut was only about this size. It was tiny, but the blood just started gushing from my head all the way over it. And I remember I was only about 8 years old, and although it was such a small cut, it was like a horror film, the way the blood came down. I remember running down the hill to my mum screaming. I was like, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die. It ended up that I didn't need stitches, but I had a head clot glued to my head for about 2 hours because we didn't really know better what to do in that situation. But it was only when I turned 11 or 12, I got my first period. And I remember I was like, oh, this is horrible. Every time I moved, every time I sneezed or I coughed or stood up, I was bleeding. And it wasn't normal, but it was my normal. But I remember I would be going to summer camp and I couldn't participate in anything, but none of the adults knew why, because I was very scared about telling anybody about it. And I was not going climbing, I wasn't going canoeing, because I was scared I was going to bleed through. So I was just constantly going to the bathroom and no one would ever notice. I would not be able to partake in some of the arts and crafts. I was cutting into lino and I got brought to the principal's office just because I was using sharp instruments. Although I knew exactly how to be careful and what my limits were, they were like, no, you shouldn't be doing this. Overall, I was always aware of the bleeding disorder, of von Willebrand, so I would always just try my best not to get into many contact sports. I never played football, camogie, anything like that. My wisdom teeth are going to be something that is going to be coming out soon, and that is something. I haven't had a major surgery in a long time. I know I'm going to have to take time off work in order to get this bleeding under control after getting my wisdom teeth out. I was only talking about yesterday within my family. They were asking me, Shannon, are you going to have children? And I was like, I don't know if this is something that I can do because of the bleeding. It's going to be a high-risk pregnancy. I'm trained to be a climbing instructor. We were training on how to be climbing instructors, and unfortunately one of my colleagues let go of the rope and I fell to the ground. I was fortunate, I only got a small bruise on my back and that was it. Have your education around you and have your supports around you. Know when you go to anyone medical, say to them, I have von Willebrand's and this is what I can tell you about it. This is what I need you to do for me. A type 1 VWD is very underdiagnosed in Ireland. There's medications and supports available for you to use. Just go and get tested, make sure that you get diagnosed. I was fortunate within my own family unit. We knew what bleeding disorders were. We knew about haemophilia, we knew about platelet defect, but no one ever knew about von Willebrand's. So if I was the only one in my family with bleeding disorder, it was likely I was never going to be diagnosed.